After my husband died, I got a new job, and every day I left a little money for an elderly homeless man who sat outside the library. One day, when I bent down again, he suddenly grabbed my arm and said, "You've been so kind to me. Don't go home tonight. Stay at a hotel. Tomorrow I'll show you." The morning my husband of 42 years passed away, I remember staring at his empty chair at the kitchen table and wondering how I would survive. That was 18 months ago. The grief counselor said it would get easier, but she never mentioned how the silence would become my constant companion. My name is Margaret Chen, and at 63 years old, I found myself starting over in ways I never imagined. Richard had handled everything. The finances, the house maintenance, even the grocery shopping in those final years, when my hip made walking difficult. When he was gone, I discovered we had almost nothing. The medical bills had eaten through our savings. The life insurance barely covered the funeral. Our daughter lived in Seattle and called once a month if I was lucky. Our son had his own family in Texas, and his own problems. So I did what any desperate widow would do. I sold the house we had lived in for 30 years, paid off what I could, and moved into a tiny one-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of Minneapolis. Then I got a job. At 63, with a bad hip and outdated skills, my options were limited. But the Good Shepherd Senior Center needed a part-time receptionist, and they were willing to hire someone my age. The pay was modest, $12 an hour for 25 hours a week, but it was something. It gave me a reason to get dressed in the morning. Every day I took the bus from my apartment to the senior center. The route passed through downtown, and I always got off 2 stops early so I could walk the last bit. The doctor said walking was good for my hip, and honestly, I needed the fresh air. That's how I first noticed him. He sat on the same bench outside the public library every single morning, an old black man with white hair and kind eyes. He wore the same faded green jacket regardless of the weather, and he always had a small paper cup in front of him. He never asked anyone for money. He never called out to passers-by. He just sat there quiet and dignified, watching the world go by. Something about him reminded me of my father. Maybe it was the way he held himself straight back despite his circumstances. Maybe it was the gentle way he nodded at people who walked past, even the ones who pretended not to see him. The first time I stopped, I didn't know what to say. I just dropped a $5 bill into his cup and mumbled something about having a nice day. He looked up at me with those warm brown eyes and said, "God bless you, ma'am. You have a kind heart." I walked away with tears in my eyes. I couldn't explain why. After that, it became our routine. Every morning I would stop by his bench, drop in whatever cash I had. Sometimes $5. Sometimes just the change from my pocket. We started talking. I learned his name was Samuel. Samuel Washington. He was 74 years old. He had been a high school history teacher for 35 years before he retired. His wife had passed away 6 years ago. His pension had been lost in some kind of fraud scheme. His apartment had been sold out from under him when the building was converted to condos. Now he slept at the shelter when there was room, on the street when there wasn't. His story broke my heart. A man who had spent his life teaching children, shaping young minds, now sitting on a bench with a paper cup. The injustice of it made me angry in ways I hadn't felt in years. "You should be living somewhere warm," I told him one November morning, when the temperature had dropped below freezing. "You should have a roof over your head." Samuel just smiled. "The Lord provides, Mrs. Margaret. He sent you to me, didn't he?" I didn't feel like much of a provision. A few dollars here and there, some conversation to break up his lonely days. But Samuel always seemed grateful. Always had a kind word. Always asked about my life. At the senior center, about my children, about how I was coping with my own loss. In many ways, he became my friend. Perhaps my only real friend in this new life of mine. This went on for almost a year. Seasons changed. Summer turned to fall, fall to winter, winter to a cold and reluctant spring. I got a small raise at the senior center. My daughter called to say she was pregnant with her first child. My son sent a card for my 64th birthday. Life moved forward in its slow, steady way. Then came that Tuesday morning in late March. I got off the bus at my usual stop, crossed the street, and headed toward the library. Samuel was in his spot, but something was different. He was standing instead of sitting, and his eyes were scanning the street with an urgency I had never seen before. When he spotted me, he rushed forward, grabbing my arm with surprising strength. "Mrs. Margaret," he said, his voice low and urgent. "I need you to listen to me very carefully." "Samuel, what's wrong? Are you hurt?" No, it's not about me." He pulled me closer to the library wall, away from the stream of pedestrians. "It's about you. Something's wrong at your job. Something dangerous." I stared at him. "What are you talking about?" "I can't explain everything right now, but you need to be very careful. Watch the new bookkeeper, the young one with the red hair. Watch what she does with the donation records. And Mrs. Margaret." He paused, his grip tightening on my arm. "Don't go home tonight. Sleep somewhere else. A hotel, a friend's place, anywhere but your apartment." "Samuel, you're scaring me. How do you know about my job? How do you know about the bookkeeper?" "I know things," he said simply. "I've been watching, listening. People talk around a homeless man like he's invisible. They say things they shouldn't say. And what I've heard," he shook his head. "Please, just trust me. Come back tomorrow morning and I'll show you everything. But don't go home tonight. Promise me." His eyes were pleading, and beneath the urgency, I saw something that looked like fear. Real fear. I promise," I heard myself say. Samuel released my arm and stepped back. Good. Now, go to work. Act normal. Don't ask questions. Don't look at the records. Just do your job and leave. I'll explain everything tomorrow." He shuffled back to his bench and sat down, returning to his usual position as if nothing had happened. I stood there for a long moment, my heart racing, trying to make sense of what had just occurred. The walk to the senior center felt longer than usual. My mind was spinning with questions. How did Samuel know about my work? What had he heard? And why was he so frightened? The Good Shepherd Senior Center was a modest facility that served about 200 elderly clients. We offered day programs, meals, social activities, and various support services. The staff was small, just 15 people, including me. The director was a woman named Patricia Holloway, who had run the place for 12 years. The clients loved her. The staff respected her. I had always thought of her as a good person. The new bookkeeper Samuel had mentioned was a young woman named Tiffany Reynolds. She had been hired about 3 months ago, shortly after the old bookkeeper retired. She was 28, pretty with bright red hair and an easy smile. Everyone liked her. She was efficient, friendly, and always willing to help. I had never thought twice about her until now. I sat at my reception desk, greeting clients and answering phones like I did every day, but my mind was elsewhere. I found myself watching Tiffany whenever she passed through the lobby. She seemed normal, cheerful, nothing suspicious. What was Samuel talking about? Around lunchtime, Patricia came out of her office and stopped by my desk. "Margaret, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Have you noticed anything unusual lately with the donations? I mean, any complaints from donors? Anything that seemed off?" My stomach tightened. "No, I don't think so." "Why?" Patricia frowned. "It's probably nothing. One of our regular donors called yesterday, said her tax receipt didn't match what she thought she donated. I'm sure it's just a clerical error. Tiffany's looking into it." "I see. Just let me know if you hear anything." She smiled and walked away. I sat very still, staring at my computer screen without seeing it. A donation discrepancy. Tiffany looking into it. Samuel's warning about the bookkeeper and the donation records. It couldn't be a coincidence. But what could I do? Samuel had told me not to ask questions, not to look at the records, just act normal and leave. The rest of the day crawled by. Every time Tiffany walked past my desk, I felt a chill. Every time Patricia's office door opened, I tensed. By 5, my nerves were frayed. I gathered my things and headed for the door, but Patricia's voice stopped me. "Margaret, before you go, can you come to my office for a minute?" My heart dropped. Of course. I followed her down the hall, my mind racing. Did she suspect something? Did she know that I knew, or was this about something else entirely? Patricia closed the door behind us and gestured to a chair. "Please, sit." I sat. "I wanted to talk to you about something confidential," she said, taking a seat behind her desk. "I've been at this center for 12 years, and I've never had to deal with anything like this before." "Like what?" Fraud? The word hung in the air. Someone is stealing from the center. I've suspected it for a few weeks now, but I didn't have proof. Now I do. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. The discrepancies in the donation records, they're not clerical errors. Someone has been systematically skimming money from our donations. Small amounts at first, a few hundred here and there, but it's added up. We're missing almost $40,000 over the past 3 months. Oh my God, I whispered, and I meant it. I called in an auditor last week. He confirmed my suspicions. Patricia leaned forward. Margaret, I'm telling you this because I trust you. You've been here for over a year. You're honest and reliable, but I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely truthful with me. Anything. Have you noticed anyone accessing the financial records who shouldn't be? Anyone asking questions about donations? Anyone? Behaving strangely? I thought about Samuel's warning. I thought about Tiffany. I thought about Patricia herself sitting here in her office telling me about fraud that someone else had supposedly committed. How did I know Patricia wasn't involved? How did I know this wasn't some kind of trap? I haven't noticed anything, I said carefully. But I'm just the receptionist. I don't have access to the financial systems. Patricia nodded slowly. I know. I know you don't. That's why I'm ruling you out. She paused. The police will be involved soon. I wanted to warn you. There may be interviews, questions. I just need to know that you'll cooperate fully. Of course I will. Good. She stood up. Thank you, Margaret. You can go. I left her office on shaky legs. The police, interviews, and Samuel's warning echoing in my head. Don't go home tonight. I didn't go home. Instead, I walked to a budget hotel about a mile from my apartment and paid $49 for a room. I told myself it was ridiculous. I told myself Samuel was just a confused old man with wild theories. I told myself I was overreacting, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. I couldn't sleep that night. I lay in the stiff hotel bed, staring at the ceiling, playing the day's events over and over in my mind. Patricia's revelation about the fraud, Tiffany's involvement or lack thereof, Samuel's mysterious knowledge. How did he know? At 2 a.m, my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. I almost didn't answer. Hello, Mrs. Chen. A woman's voice. Professional and clipped. This is Sergeant Rivera with the Minneapolis Police Department. I'm calling about your apartment building. My blood went cold. What about it? There's been an incident, a fire. The building has been evacuated. We're trying to account for all residents. Are you home right now? No, I managed. No, I'm staying somewhere else tonight. That's fortunate. The fire started on your floor. Your unit sustained significant damage. Ma'am, are you all right? I couldn't speak. I couldn't breathe. Ma'am, I'm fine. I whispered. I'm fine. The officer gave me more information, an address to check in with, a number to call for emergency housing assistance. I wrote it all down mechanically, my hand shaking so badly I could barely hold the pen. After I hung up, I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time. A fire on my floor. If I had gone home, if I had been in my bed like any normal night, Samuel had known. Somehow he had known. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. At 7 a.m, I took a cab to the library. Samuel was there in his usual spot, but he stood up when he saw me coming. You're alive? He said, and his voice cracked with emotion. Thank God. Thank God, Samuel. I grabbed his hands. How did you know the fire? My apartment. How did you know? Come sit. He led me to the bench, and we sat down together. He reached into his faded jacket and pulled out a small notebook, the kind children use in school. I've been watching your building for 3 weeks, he said quietly. Ever since I overheard something that worried me. Overheard what? Where? Here. He gestured at the bench, the library, the street. People talk, Mrs. Margaret. They make phone calls. They have conversations. They don't notice the homeless man on the bench. They don't think he's listening. He opened the notebook. Inside were pages of cramped handwriting, dates and times and observations. 3 weeks ago, 2 men sat on this bench right where we're sitting now. They were talking about money, a lot of money. Money being moved from somewhere to somewhere else. Money that belonged to old people. He looked at me. They mentioned the Good Shepherd Senior Center. My heart was pounding. What did they say? They said the operation was going well. They said the bookkeeper was doing her job. They said no one suspected anything. He turned a page. Then one of them mentioned a problem. He said there was an old woman at the center, a receptionist, who was getting suspicious. He said she had been asking questions about the donation records, but I hadn't asked any questions. I didn't know anything. I know, but someone thought you did. And someone decided you were a risk. Samuel's voice was heavy. Last night, those same two men were back. They were talking about a fire. They were talking about making it look like an electrical accident. They mentioned your name, Mrs. Margaret. They mentioned your apartment number. I felt sick. Who are they? Did you recognize them? One of them I had seen before at the senior center. Who? Samuel reached into his notebook and pulled out a photograph. Grainy and dark, clearly taken with a cheap phone, but I could make out the figure well enough. It was Patricia Holloway. And standing next to her was a man I didn't recognize. Tall and thin with a sharp face. I took this 2 days ago. Samuel said, I followed them when they left here. They went to a coffee shop 3 blocks away. They met with 2 other people. I couldn't hear what they said, but I got this. He showed me another photo. Patricia, the tall man, and 2 others I had never seen. I think it's bigger than just the bookkeeper, Samuel said. I think your director is running the whole thing. I stared at the photos, my mind reeling. Patricia, who I had trusted. Patricia, who had told me about the fraud just yesterday, who had looked me in the eye and lied. She was setting me up. I realized she told me about the fraud yesterday. She said the police would be involved. She said there would be interviews. She was going to pin it on me. And when the police found your body in that fire, the case would be closed. Tragic accident. The thief died before she could be brought to justice. No one would look any further. I felt a wave of nausea. I need to go to the police. Yes. Samuel pressed the notebook into my hands. Take this. Everything I've seen, everything I've heard, it's all written down. The photos are on this phone. He handed me an old flip phone. It's not much, but it's proof. I looked at this man. This homeless man who I had given pocket change to for a year. This man who had spent 3 weeks watching, listening, gathering evidence. This man who had saved my life. Samuel, why? Why did you do all this? He smiled. That same gentle smile I had seen every morning for 12 months. Because you treated me like a person, Mrs. Margaret. You stopped. You talked. You looked me in the eye. Do you know how rare that is? Do you know what that means to someone like me? Tears were streaming down my face. I was a teacher for 35 years, he continued. I taught history. I taught students about justice, about standing up for what's right, about using your knowledge to help others. When I lost everything, I thought those days were behind me. But then I saw you, and I saw those men, and I realized I could still do something. I could still be useful. You saved my life. You gave me back mine. He squeezed my hands. Now go to the police, show them everything, and don't worry about me. I'll be fine. The next few weeks were a blur. I went to the police with Samuel's notebook and photos. They were skeptical at first, but the evidence was solid. They brought in investigators, accountants, federal agents. What they uncovered was staggering. Patricia Holloway had been running a fraud scheme for over 5 years, not just at Good Shepherd, but at 3 other senior centers across the state. She had stolen over $2 million from programs meant to help elderly people. The tall man in the photo was her brother, a financial consultant who had helped her launder the money. Tiffany, the bookkeeper, was her niece, brought in to help manage the operation. They had been planning to close down the Good Shepherd operation and disappear, but they needed a scapegoat first. They needed someone to blame for the missing money. That someone was me. The fire at my apartment wasn't an accident. It was arson. The police found evidence of an accelerant, traced the purchase of gasoline to Patricia's brother. They arrested all 4 of them within a week. I testified at the trial. I told the jury everything. Samuel testified too, wearing a borrowed suit and speaking with the calm dignity of a man who had spent his life in classrooms. Patricia got 15 years, her brother got 12. Tiffany got 5. The 4th conspirator, a man who had been hired to start the fire, got 20. Justice was served. But for me, the real story was just beginning. After the trial, I went looking for Samuel. He wasn't at his bench. He wasn't at the shelter. No one had seen him for days. I was frantic. What if Patricia's people had found him? What if something had happened to him? 3 days later, I found him at the hospital. He had collapsed on the street, dehydrated and malnourished. His kidneys were failing. The doctor said he had been living with untreated diabetes for years. I sat by his bed holding his hand, crying. "Don't cry, Mrs. Margaret," he said, his voice weak but still gentle. "This isn't your fault. I should have done more. I should have helped you sooner. You helped me every day. You gave me something to look forward to. That was enough." But it wasn't enough. Not for me. I spent the next month fighting for Samuel Washington. I contacted social services, legal aid, housing authorities. I wrote letters to newspapers, to politicians, to anyone who would listen. I told his story, the story of a retired teacher who had lost everything through no fault of his own. People responded. Donations came in. A lawyer took his case pro bono, fighting to recover his lost pension. A non-profit housing organization found him an apartment. The school district where he had taught for 35 years started a fund in his name. By June, Samuel was out of the hospital and living in a clean, safe apartment of his own. I visited him on move-in day. He sat in his new living room, looking around at the furniture we had assembled, at the books people had donated, at the photos of his late wife that I had helped him hang on the wall. "Mrs. Margaret," he said, shaking his head. "You didn't have to do all this?" "Yes, I did." I sat down beside him. "You saved my life, Samuel. Not just from the fire, but from the loneliness, from the emptiness. You gave me a friend when I needed one most. This is the least I could do." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You know what? I told my students every year on the first day of class. I told them that history isn't just about the past, it's about choices, the small choices we make every day, how we treat each other, how we help or ignore. Those choices shape the future. They create ripples that spread out in ways we can never predict." "Ripples," I repeated. "That's right. You stopped at my bench one morning and dropped $5 in my cup. That was a small choice, a tiny ripple. But look where it led. Look at everything that came from that one small act of kindness." I thought about it. If I hadn't stopped that first morning, if I hadn't kept stopping day after day, if Samuel hadn't felt that I was worth protecting, if he hadn't spent 3 weeks gathering evidence that saved my life, all of it, everything began with a $5 bill and a few kind words. "The world can be cruel," Samuel continued. "People can be cruel, but kindness exists too. And when we choose kindness, even in small ways, we change the world. We create ripples that can grow into waves." I'm 65 now. The trial was over a year ago. My daughter had her baby, a beautiful girl named Eleanor. My son came to visit for Christmas with his whole family. Life goes on. I still work at a senior center, a different one now. And I make sure to look out for signs of fraud. I still take the bus and walk the last few stops. And every morning I stop by a certain apartment building and have coffee with my friend Samuel. He's healthier now. His diabetes is under control. His pension was partially recovered. He volunteers at the library, helping kids with their homework, teaching them about history, about justice, about the power of small choices. Sometimes people ask me what I learned from everything that happened. They expect me to talk about crime and corruption, about the dangers that can hide in ordinary places, about how you never really know who to trust. But that's not what I learned. What I learned is this: kindness matters. Every single act, no matter how small, every time you stop instead of walking by, every time you look someone in the eye, every time you treat another person with dignity and respect, you never know who's watching. You never know what ripples you're creating. You never know whose life you might be saving or whose life might save yours. Samuel Washington was a homeless man on a bench. I was a lonely widow with pocket change to spare. Together we brought down a criminal organization, sent 4 people to prison, recovered millions of stolen dollars, and built a friendship that will last for the rest of our lives. All because I stopped one morning and dropped $5 in a paper cup. So, that's my advice to you. Whoever you are, wherever you are, be kind. Stop for the person everyone else walks past. Take a moment to see the humanity and people who have been made invisible by their circumstances. You never know, that small act of kindness might come back to save your life. It saved mine. Welcome to Twisted RT Stories. I share new life stories here every day. and I'd really appreciate it if you hit subscribe and liked my video. Write in the comments which city you're watching from and what time it is. I'm so curious to know where all you wonderful people are tuning in from. And now, 2 of my most popular stories will pop up on the screen so you can choose what to watch next.